Hey, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me.
I'll do my best. Hit me.
All right. So, one obvious, like an easy one is just what are some ways that you think that they have an effect on people, personally and as you've seen it?
What are the ways that I think video games have an effect on people?
Yeah.
Just in general. Okay.
Just in
Uh,
general and, behavior wise also.
Video games aren't that much different than other media because they are working to envelop all of your senses to tell a story and make you feel like you are somehow a part of it. Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings have become incredibly popular because they're among the best at the form to take that sort of feeling that you could be any of the characters and that you feel like you are them.
Yeah.
Video games do that in a different way by slapping a control in your hand. And sometimes it's as simple as you're the action hero, shoot the thing. Sometimes it can be as elaborate as a full story and a lot of people talking to you and giving you text along the way and things in the middle. So I think games can be influential in the same way that other media are, in that they are another piece of the learning about the world puzzle, especially when you're young. You're picking up all kinds of stuff when you're a little kid to just understand how the world works. So everything you see and touch and play with games, books, board games, school systems, whatever you're interacting with, can inform your general worldview. And it's, a very careful balance as you get older to understand the difference between fiction and reality, whether you are playing a video game or reading a newspaper.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, and that goes for like uh I think that goes for like a lot of media because, so much stuff can be desensitizing nowadays. And I don't know. I think that games do get a bad rap for being the worst, but you look at some of the movies that come out, and you think about like American Sniper and stuff. I feel like
I think
that's,
ultimately,
you know,
whatever I was lucky as a kid to have a home where I was allowed to generally play with a bunch of stuff and then ask questions and have parents who participate. And I think any sort of thing that you hand to a kid without perspective could potentially be dangerous. And also, anything can be handed to a curious, interested kid and get a more positive reaction. You're ultimately having you are growing these creatures who want to know about everything in the world, and they tend to go after things that they are not allowed or not supposed to play with. Cursing happens in, you don't hear curse words on TV, but kids cuss in lunchrooms by the age of 12, if not earlier. There's
yeah.
just, so it's less about games influencing as much as just them being a part of a giant media landscape, in my opinion. Oh, and the research is only beginning to accrue about how interactivity and screens really impact kids from every single age range. Early research is already showing that a touchscreen device may be better for kids in certain instances than an inactive, passive TV watching experience. It's not across the board, but certain sort of stimulus response. You tap the screen because the letter A is on there. You hear the letter A being said out loud, that sort of stuff. So, it's early days in terms of the amount of progress that's being made with interactive media and how it impacts people at every single age range from 4 to 44.
Yeah, for sure. You
So
know, weirdly enough, I actually read some studies, talking about how video games can be beneficial on people. And I think as an umbrella, they sort of mean, interactive media and whatnot. And one thing I saw that was interesting is, strangely enough, if somebody has autism, specifically kids, it can actually help them develop social skills, surprisingly enough.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. But it is you got to be careful with any sort of study because again, early days, limited cherry pick stuff.
yeah.
To get papers published. A good head. I've got a friend or a family members who do studies like this for a living, and
Hmm.
the politics and weirdness that come from studies. Always take a second look at the data. That's what we always do at Ars Technica when we
Yeah.
see a study come out. So but it's definitely interesting stuff in terms of what interactivity adds to our watching experience. So okay, so what other questions you got?
One thing I wanted to discuss some of the stats that I got. This one I actually found very surprising. I asked, do you feel influenced by media? Um, so 43.7% said sometimes, and 21.1 said no. But then, astoundingly, 35.2% said yes. I think that that's really interesting because it's. I think it is good that I didn't record names or anything because generally people are very unwilling to admit any sort of flaw. And I guess some people don't consider that a flaw, but I do think that's interesting that people were so open about saying that they feel influenced by media. Just
Mhm.
that I don't know, that just surprised me because you know we get this thing, everybody's always like, oh, you don't ever actually let anything get to you, but clearly that's not what kids think, which I just found that surprising.
No, I'm not surprised, especially on a blind survey, that anything you see, especially as games become more plot heavy, have more characters, and tell stories about a different kind of world, whether it's a fantasy world or a different country. There's absolutely a way that a game can influence, though, especially the time you play with it, the number of people you meet online. If it's a social experience, that's absolutely. I would not even hesitate
Yeah.
as a when I was only beginning to play internet games, so I'm 37. So that meant in the 90s when dial-up modems were the way you got online, there was a little bit of headset talk, but mostly chat. So there was social interaction and different age groups that you might not otherwise run into. So that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense. Um, because I can say that, when I was playing, when you play some more heavy stuff like I don't know, Life is Strange or, Spec Ops: The Line, stuff that deals with more real world feeling things,
Hmm.
it definitely does affect my, mood and stuff, even if I don't want to admit that.
Yeah,
Just because I mean, it's like watching a sad movie, but it's more strong because you feel like you had a direct input on it, even if you
hmm,
didn't, even if it was all scripted.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
Um, One thing was, have you ever seen or done something in a game or a movie or show or in other media that's made you upset or shaken? And 19% said yes in a game, 36% said no, which I found that a little bit surprising. That seems like something that I don't know. I can say I definitely have in a game and a movie and show. And then 52% said yes in a movie or show.
Hmm.
And so I thought that was a little bit interesting, but not very unsurprising since movies and shows are a lot more prevalent.
For sure.
And then now this one I do think this is not surprising for the age group, but it was sorry, does seeing graphic violence in movies bother you? 8.5% said yes, and then 35.2% said sometimes, and 56.3% said no.
Hmm.
I thought that was a little interesting because I know there are people at my school that are squeamish, but and obviously, with the headline effects of violent video games, nobody. It's probably a pretty um, similar crowd that's answering all these questions, but that one just kind of surprised me because graphic violence in movies can bother me. I just
I think it
found that
ultimately
interesting.
depends on what the source is when you've got a kid who may have only seen very soft R-rated stuff. You've got like
Hmm.
Fast and Furious where people wreck cars and you don't see actually blood stuff compared to a really dark film like Apocalypse Now, which I would not
Yeah.
recommend that you watch before the age of 18 because it looks at the horrors of Vietnam in very, very disturbing ways. So, that's the sort of question that leaves a few variables out. An online shooter is very different where you're expected to be reacting to all kinds of different stuff all around you. Once you're in an online game where there's other people involved, whether they're cooperating or competing, then that itself may be more affecting to me than a story because I'm constantly keeping an eye on what the heck is going on. So I ultimately think it's about what verbs are expected and what variables get inserted. If it's just a pre-made game, then it tends to be easier to lock into a groove. If it's an online game, then it can be more disruptive and more real. If someone decides to call me a curse word or says something really terrible, that can be a version of an interaction that I was not expecting. I
Hmm.
don't tend to care for that much stuff, and that is a sort of thing that the games industry is still grappling with. The idea of people being the variable that gets in there and how gameplay results, especially if you're like a
Yeah.
12-year-old and all of a sudden you're learning new words.
Oh, there's a reason the ESRB says, online interaction's not rated. You
Mm-hmm.
know, because
Yeah.
it's impossible to know. You know, and
Yeah.
there are like weird attempts. Like I noticed that Destiny 2 has a curse word filter. I'm not sure how that would
Mhm.
work, but that's probably just chat though, you know. And so it
Yeah.
does get a lot more personal uh very fast, you know. I just
Yeah.
wanted to cap this off with personally, what age do you think, the average person should be able to play like a standard M game, like just something like Call of Duty. And how heavily does that depend on the person?
I think there is a certain element of kids going beyond the quote unquote expected bounds. I was just watching Dave Grohl talking about all the punk rock music that he got to get into well before he was 17 in terms of cuss words and mature subject matter when he was living in Washington, D.C., and punk rock was exploding in the early 80s. And he thanked it was a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame where he thanked his mother for letting him get into that kind of music and having his horizons expanded as a result. I think that media that takes people outside of their own worldview um, should be pushed onto young adults from 50, I'd say 15 is sort of the beginning of, well, the world is starting to appear anyway. And a good, well-rounded person is going to see more of that kind of stuff and should be exposed to it and have an opportunity in a safe home environment to in any way say, hey, I saw this weird thing and I got a question about it, or I want to talk
Hmm.
about this, because that goes away once you're in college and you becomes your dumb buddy in a dorm room down the hall doing that. And online interactions, I think it's sort of a different number. I think that online interactions are, to me, way more terrifying. I am not a parent currently, and I'm terrified at the idea of being it, because online interactions can go in so many different directions so quickly. Because it's not just about playing a video game. If you're getting online and you're playing a video game and you're communicating with other people, that is the stepping stone to forums, to Discord chat rooms, to all these different ways to interact and communicate that then get infiltrated. I would be very scared about letting a kid just like follow breadcrumb trails down Fortnite strategies, because you might end up in a really
Hmm.
messed up Reddit channel with a dude who's doing essentially recruiting for a hate gang. And these things are happening. Like, that's part of the
Yeah.
research I do. It isn't just games. It's about how young people are turned into pawns in these sort of messed up gangs where people are uh, posting memes and sending threats and calling in doxing. Like, that stuff all begins with this sort of breadcrumbing of things on the internet. So to me, a controlled video game where you're able to sort of get in and interact with the system and maybe see some cuss words and some blood is way better than having a completely unchecked run through the internet world and all of the different little connections there are. Anything about
Definitely.
connecting to a wider community is really where there needs to be just a bigger layer of conversation, understanding, and inclusion with a family. And I don't envy any parent who's in that situation, but
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, the best thing to do is, as soon as something weird happens online, don't just say, "Oh, that's okay," because that'll add up. 5, 6, 7 interactions later, and all of a sudden, you're sending weird phone calls to schools and pretending to call in a pipe bomb threat, and then everyone's like, "What
Oh
the heck
yeah.
just happened?" And I'm not. that sounds really extreme and weird, but that's
It
kind of how
happens.
messed up. That's how messed up it can be on the internet. So
Yeah.
that's my feeling about that. Video games are fine. Getting online with a microphone is the beginning of scary stuff.
Definitely. Okay, thank you
Yeah.
so much, man. This has been really
Yeah.
helpful.